Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they do. They get it right. They absolutely get it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. Delighted to be back with you again after taking last week as a very busy week. We had a lot going on, so we did a replay on a program. And you know what? You can catch up with that another time. But this week, again, was very busy on a whole different note and so much different information that has come about. And what some people are saying, and which is some major tragedies that have occurred this past week. But I think that the actions that were taken by two individuals are well noted, that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals that are taking more severe actions every single day. And those people are the abortionists who are murdering the unborn, those humans that God has from before their parents ever decided to have sex, that they would be people, and that He, in His great and infinite wisdom, understood the tragedy that they would go through on becoming an unborn. I don't understand it. I don't comprehend it, but that's why I'm not God. And what we're going to talk about today is sovereignty. We're going to talk about sovereignty from a number of different perspectives, because when it comes to understanding some of what is going on relative to these mass murders that happen by two people that are demented, and I'll take that even more than just demented, that are morally deranged. They're morally deranged by being immoral. And that's where we're going to talk about that sovereignty, because it comes into the full context that, as I have said, is that the churches are no longer doing their jobs. The pastors are no longer preaching, except for a few, those truths from Scripture that cross all of the social and political barriers, if you will. And what it comes down to is understanding sovereignty. First off, that God is sovereign. So everything that occurs operates within the context of His sovereignty. And second, because of how He created and designed us, so too we, within the context of a moral, virtuous society, a constitutional republic that we have, are sovereigns, are citizen sovereigns. So we're going to take a look at that from a couple of perspectives. And one of the primary examples that I am going to talk about today was a friend of Samuel Adams. In fact, Samuel Adams, in a context, if you will, in his August 1st speech on the Declaration of Independence, somewhat quotes this individual. This individual was one of the key people, I say, in enduring what we would call now, during our time frame, the First Great Awakening. He was profound. He was just eloquent. He was well studied. And he was someone that understood how to bring that gospel truth across every aspect of what it is to be a human. And that person is none other than Dr. Mayhew. We're going to talk about Dr. Mayhew to some extent today, but I want to take and tie in a couple other things. Somehow in here, I want to weave in a speech that Kathy and I listened to on YouTube by Tucker Carlson as a keynote speaker during, I think it was the National uh, Conservative Conference in Washington, D.C. And it was very interesting as we were listening to that. I told Kathy, I said, wow, that's what I want to be talking about on my program is some of his key points. And he also stole the thunder on a book that I've been writing for a good number of years. I just haven't had time to get back to it. Is the essence of it is that where we have taken and transitioned from liberty to economy. And one of Tucker's first points, I guess I'll just get right to the Tucker piece, and then I'm going to tie in a couple other things, is that one of the things that Tucker said that probably we should be awake at night about, and we should be fearing and trying to figure out how we uh, deal with it, is that all of the major corporations, the Silicon Valley corporations, all of these people who, quite frankly, are godless, they are the ones that are forcing now all of our social and political change. So the Google schmoogles, Facebooks, schmucks, Twitter didders, the Fortune 500, as he mentioned, when you take and you have all of the social justice warriors at the corporate level as they are in the boardrooms and such, then what you're having is you're having that manipulation of the very mindsets of the people through advertising, through products, through the labels, through every means of how we interact and how we consume goods are now being driven with the evils, because that's what they are, the evils, the immorality, the lack of true virtue as defined by our founding fathers is being foisted on us in every manner whatsoever. And then I think another important part, which I'm going to segue to an article in the Federalist here in a moment, is that he was talking about is, and actually Dr. Soul was talking about it on a program and in one of his books, is the whole fact and reality is that when you own the language and you change the language and you determine what words are, what words will survive, what words don't survive, then what you're doing is you're establishing the thought processes of the people. And that is exactly what we have going on when we see the censorship of Twitter and Google and the redistribution of search engines and as to what will come up at the top based on a word search. And then with artificial intelligence is in and of itself, artificial intelligence could have some really great value, but the way that Google and the others in Facebook are looking and using artificial intelligence is to have control over everybody. Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir, and most everybody here knows it. They hear it. They've heard it from so many other people. But where we're not hearing it, once again, is we're not hearing it from the pulpits. We're not hearing it from those that have another form of great influence. Well, let me think about that for a second. We are hearing it from the pulpits. We're hearing it from the pulpits in that they're turning to the social justice warrior aspect. They're turning to all of these other theological perspectives that are perversions of the true gospel and what we would have seen during our foundational era. And what we're seeing is that this acceptance of tolerance and this acceptance of this other theories, if you will, and I'm going to have to jump to my notes for a second because I always forget about it. I think we talked about it a few programs back with Cody Leibold and the work that he's doing in regards to some of these theoretical and theological insanities, and it's called the critical race theory. And what we're seeing with cultural Marxism and the social gospel, when we look at those, are all parts and parcel of what is going on from environmentalism, humanism. There are all those other derivatives of another gospel. I thought it was very interesting that Tucker Carlson even managed to say that what we see and what we have going on right now, in particular with the left, is that they're better evangelicals than what we would look at as biblical evangelicals, and that he called it a religion. And in fact, there's many that have been saying that humanism, environmentalism, and all of that, myself included, have been commenting that that is a religion. It is supplanting the God, the sovereign God of the universe for the creature and the creation. And those are exactly what Paul talks about in Romans. And we're going to touch a little bit more on what is being said in Romans in the next couple of segments based on what Dr. Mayhew writes in his challenge during his period of time right away in 1750, and what he was talking about for the even religious pressure of the day and of the time in the whole area of the colonies. But I'm going to have to tell you that when we get into this, we are going to talk on his discourse on the right of private judgment. And when we talk about that, what we're going to see is that he has probably the best perspective that I have talked about in the past relative to Romans, and how Romans has and is misinterpreted and spoken of to take and actually force the people, even now in America, to vote away from what it means to be a constitutional republic. And this is coming out of the pastors. Kath, do you remember what that article, what it was that you heard on the pastors taking and telling people not to vote Republican? Think about it. Maybe we'll bring that up in the next segment. She'll have to look at that, and we'll think about it. But that goes into this whole theory and the group that a lot of the major pastors are a part of, and the major group of all of these different pastors who are now taking and coming together in unison to take and speak against this country, to speak against our constitutional republic, to speak against all of the various truths that we should hold dear. So I guess that's kind of interesting. But, Sam Adams, as I look here and I see that he was one of the key people that read and understood him and himself and James Otis. There was a Professor Winthrop and many others, and there was also the Judge Sewell, who were very close with Dr. Mayhew and clearly understood that whole perspective that I talk with and I talk about, is that first and foremost, God is sovereign without question. And so therefore, when we understand that, that allows us, based on that gift that he gives through salvation, is that we can be sovereign because we're supposed to be executing his will. Just go to the Lord's Prayer and you can figure that out. That is exactly what we're supposed to be doing, is executing what is in heaven on earth, and doing that according to the perspective of the scripture and living out everything that Christ taught, and which is also captured throughout the whole Old Testament in such a manner that I term it very simply the extensibility of the gospel, which means that it is living gospel truth across every aspect of life. And when we're able to do that, then we're able to take and live a moral and virtuous life within the context of a constitutional republic, which that's the only people that can live here. That's the only people that can survive. Otherwise, you have anarchy, chaos, despotism, and tyranny. And those are exactly what we're seeing happening right now with everything that's going on, and the way that the tragedies of two shootings are being manipulated by the Democrats, or I should say the socialist communists. But Sam Adams got it right, as I mentioned, and so did those anti-federalists. So come on back in the next segment when we pick up with what really matters. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this second segment of Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. Yes, they did. They absolutely got it right. And I just want to let you know that you can take and get all the archives at samueladamsreturns.net. That's samueladamsreturns.net. And there you can also find these two books, and I'm pointing to them for all of those that are listening on Liberty Works Radio Network, that my two books are available at samueladamsreturns.net, which will take you over to Amazon, and that would be the best place to get those two books right now there. I also want to thank all of my friends at Liberty Works Radio Network for, again, having me on these time frames every Saturday. It is such an honor and a delight to be part of the programming, and it's just always wonderful when I'm able to take and know that we're going to hit the programming here and get that done. I also wanted to thank once again Dr. Mike Spalding for having me at the Go Therefore Conference 2019. That was really exciting. And we are now on the soaringeagleradio.com, and that is every Saturday at 8 p.m. And you can hear that live at WTTP 101.1 FM in Lima, Ohio. So I would just encourage you to go to soaringeagleradio.com, and every Saturday at 8 p.m. you can hear a partial broadcast of this program. We have to jam it on down into two segments instead of the three segments that we have here at Liberty Works Radio Network, or which is also in the archives at samueladamsreturns.net. So we were talking about getting to Dr. Mayhew, talking about the absolute sovereignty of God, meaning then that we can be sovereign citizens within a constitutional republic if we're a moral and virtuous people. We were talking about the two shootings, the Dayton and the El Paso shootings of the past week, and that these people were, I don't even want to go down that path of calling them leftists. They were immoral. They were morally deprived. They were morally void. Any problems that they had, or anything that, in my mind, I did a program a few weeks back on mental health. And quite frankly, because we do not teach the Ten Commandments, we do not teach morality any longer in the schools, at home, and in many churches, we don't do that. And so, therefore, what we have is many people that are what is called emotionally disturbed because they have no moral context from which to operate. And we'll talk about that. If we get to it in this segment, wonderful. If not, I definitely am going to cover bits and pieces of what Dr. Mayhew had to say that points specifically to that, and the fact that many pastors, especially the big name pastors, are not teaching Romans correctly, and therefore they're all sitting on a rooftop and not becoming engaged as we should be socially. That was something else that, as I mentioned in the first segment, Tucker Carlson said in his speech, in particular to children, is that, why are we letting evil, and I'll call it evil, he didn't call it evil, but I will call it evil. Why are we allowing evil to dictate how our children are raised, how our children are educated, how our children are defined, how our children are told to define the world? That's our job. That's your job. That's my job. Parents and grandparents in particular, because I think that the majority of people that listen to the programming are grandparents, and yet you throw shoes at the TV. Why aren't you out there punching people in the nose for destroying the lives of your grandchildren? Parents, why aren't you out there punching people in the nose for destroying the lives of your children? Why aren't you out there taking and fighting at the school boards and getting those people voted out and get yourself voted in to get morality back into the schools? I think the other thing that is going to happen, which Mr. Carlson talked about, is we're going to see this boomerang effect in that. And when we see all these stupid illegal red flag laws and all of this other stuff being used as an oversteering mechanism for what should be happening in the churches, need to re-steer themselves, refix their rudders on understanding all these truths that we'll talk about with Dr. Mayhew. Two things I want to bring up relative to that whole idea of economy over liberty comes down and is relative to these shootings as well, is the double murder that ended Ali Castile's life is an indictment of abortion culture. Tucker talked about it in a different way. He talked about the abortion culture being something that is promoted not just by Planned Parenthood, but it's promoted by these globalist businesses or just the major businesses in America. That's where I was mentioning in the last segment about the social actions within the context of corporations and all of the technology giants, is the fact that, you know what, if women don't have babies and families to deal with, quoting, but I've said it before, but I will say, paraphrase, is that then they can become slaves of the corporatists. They can be slaves of the businesses that they go to work for, and they get enslaved with the ideas that, oh, now they're independent. Now they can make money. Now they can do this and that. When in reality, God designed them, women, to be moms, to be the centers, to be the focal point on determining how a family comes together. And at the same time, when we have all of these other chasing after economy instead of understanding liberty, then what we have are the two people have to work to survive. Kathy and I driving around, we have seen many, many job posters out in front of businesses for technical jobs. Well, what do we have? We have the Democrats and all the others taking in saying, oh, we'll give you free college. When college, it's a bunch of baloney, all right? And I've talked about that before. But let's get back here to this double murder idea on what was happening in this whole indictment on abortion. And you have to read the article, and it's on the Federalist.com, and it really gets into what is going on. Is that it was an exclusive report that was in the Daily Mail, and the question was posed this way. Many of us were disturbed by the murder of University of Mississippi undergraduate Ali Castile last week. By all accounts, she was such a deeply kind and heartful person. What could have possibly been the motivation to kill someone who radiated such powerful goodness? And it being a double murder was because she was pregnant. And the answer in a short order, because I think we're running out of time and I want to get to something else that ties to that, 6 minutes, is that the person that murdered her was the father of the child. And his rationale for murdering her was the fact that it was going to ruin his life because he could not get Allie to go have an abortion. She told him no. She was going to have the baby. She understood life, and her life and the life of the child were taken in a murder because there was no value of life, and the self-centered godlessness of the murderer, the sperm donor, if you will, he didn't care. He didn't care. But now, he has to care. So when you look at that and what I said earlier about the abortion culture, definitely look in the archives for this article, which then ties to the other aspect of liberty and how China tries to take its totalitarian social control tactics global. Another article in the Federalist that I think is pertinent to what is happening in free speech, what is happening in college campuses, because what you have here is that China, with all the things that are going on in Hong Kong and the riots that are happening there, and standing up against mainland China in its totalitarian culture, it's really gone crazy in that what you have is you have Chinese students that in the likes at the University of Auckland in New Zealand, they were taking and actually shoving other students to the ground. They were actually causing just havoc on all of these and violently going against students that were for the liberties and freedoms that one would expect in what Hong Kong once had under British rule. But they don't have that. So what's happening now is China is taking this control, and what they're doing, they're setting up these Confucius institutes all over the world. And the Confucius institutes are run by the Communist Party United Front Worker Department. And let's see, I'm trying to find out the number, but here in the United States, there are, a great number. Oh, United States Front, that what's happening here, there's 1,000 Confucius Institutes worldwide, and that they're at college campuses. And so they're allowed to run and work on college campuses. And what they've been doing is they have been shutting down free thinking Chinese people. And what they're also doing is, in the guise of teaching Confucianism, which is a philosophy, as they say, so they get around all of the religious aspects of Confucianism, is that they then go against anybody that goes against China. They go against teachers. They go against professors. They go against students. So once again, we're seeing that this is tied to within the academic realm again, with China being a major trading partner, and that we should have that in academia. Those whole ideas that China needs to be, somebody that we have to have these communications with. But they're shutting down liberty. So you're getting to that whole concept once again of economy over liberty. You're getting to the totalitarian concepts, whether they're abortion, whether they're Chinese influence, whether they are the other isms that I always talk about: humanism, environmentalism, socialism, all of the isms that are replacing the sovereignty of God. They're godless. They're absolutely godless. And that's what we'll get into, especially in this next third segment, when we talk about what Dr. Mayhew had to say that got this country going, because he stood up against the totalitarianism within the Episcopal Church, within the Church of England. He stood up against totalitarianism from a political front. He stood up against totalitarianism on a social front. Ladies and gentlemen, it's amazing that when we look at it, and I bring that out as I talk about the chaplains and clergy of the revolution, they're at samueladamsreturns.net, what we're seeing is that the pastors and the pulpits are to blame right now for what happened in El Paso, what happened in Dayton, what happens on the college campuses, what happens in your preschool through high school. Yeah, we got to get that right. See, Sam Adams, Dr. Mayhew, Otis, all of these founding fathers understood the truths that we had to have a moral and virtuous people. There's only one place for that to happen. So Sam Adams understood it, the Anti-Federalists understood it, and yes, they did. They got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists, they absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. Delighted to be here with you both on Liberty Works Radio Network and at SoaringEagleRadio.com. Just what a delight. One new announcement that I'd like to make. We are launching, it's been launched for now, but the website is up. Go to pepper-licious.com for information on a culinary experience of what it means to use hot peppers. And we're talking about specific types of hot peppers. So I don't want to belabor that, but check out pepper-licious.com. And that is pepper-licious, LICIOUS.com, pepperlicious.com. You'll find it very interesting. So let's just jump right to, with everything else that I already said in the first two segments, we need to get to Dr. Mayhew. Dr. Mayhew was an extremely controversial person, as were most of the pastors and chaplains during the Revolutionary period. Dr. Mayhew really came on stage very powerfully right around 1750 with his writings. And one of the writings that we are going to talk about is what I mentioned back in the first segment, and that is the Discourse on the Right of Private Judgment. Just real quick on Mayhew, I'll put in the notes, I have put in the notes there on the blog for you to go ahead and you can look at what I just kind of pulled in the notes in a reference to the writings of Mayhew. And from the whole perspective of him being controversial, it was not just in his political views and how he was able to really bring scripture to bear. There were also some various discussions about his theological perspectives, yet he is noted as being one of the top theologians in all of America at his time. In fact, he was granted a honorary doctorate degrees out of even Scotland for many of his writings. One of his people that just thought he was one of the most distinguished people was Chief Justice Sewall. And he was an early and consistent friend, and Sewall passed in 1760, and that was a major hit to Dr. Mayhew and to the understanding of what the writer of Mayhew's biography called Liberal Christianity, which was that balance in Puritanism and in Congregationalism, as they were looking at many of the different theological positions of the day, which I'm not going to get into all of that. But Mayhew's writings, as it was stated here, they were much admired, as well as for boldness as the ability of the writer. The learned among the laity sought for them and pursued them with great avidity. So that's very interesting. That means the learned of regular us people looked at them. Many of them were commanded by the eminent patriots of the period. And long after lamented death of the writer, being Dr. Mayhew, they were read and quoted by the most cultivated and intelligent portion of the community. And those were in the first on this list, on the footnote, on page 32 of the book, is that Samuel Adams was first on the list, then James Bovenden, then James Otis, and then Judge Prairie, Professor Winthrop, were his intimate friends and highly esteemed him for his advocacy of civil liberty as well as of rational religion. And he corresponded with patriotic individuals both in southern colonies and in Great Britain. So I think that's very interesting to note. His discourse, which had reference to the nature and true design of civil government, in which he opposed the slavish doctrines early advanced by some of the ministers of George III, were republished in England by the Friend of Political Liberty and the constitutional principles adopted at the Revolution of 1688. You have to remember about that. And the sermons on the right of private judgment and on religious freedom were received with high approbation, even by many of the clergy and people in Great Britain, and operated, it was believed, with the governors of the university at Aberdeen, Scotland, to confer on him the honorary degree of Doctor of Divinity in 1751. So his first and primary writing that he did, basically he preached it in 1749. It was published in 1750, got to England in 1750. In 1751, he was given a doctorate degree there out of Aberdeen, Scotland. Very, very interesting in all. So this whole discourse on the right of private judgment he gets to is that it was an argumentative discourse, illustrating his views of natural and revealed religion and showing the natural and universal obligations of piety to God and of justice and benevolence to man, that the doctrines and duties of Christianity are agreeable to the reason and common sense of mankind. What have we lost? We don't get that anymore. We have gone so far in humanism and all the other isms that Christianity is no longer agreeable to the reason and common sense of mankind, according to everything that we're hearing out there in the Google schmoogles, all of these anti-God, godless, immoral, chasers after power and control and money, from those in Silicon Valley to those sitting in congressional seats. So the attacks on Christianity are only allowed because the pulpits have allowed it. And you have, all of you that have listened to me, I'm not trying to beat up on you or anything like that, because I know, you're doing so many great things out there. But when and if, like Dr. Mike Spalding preaches from the pulpit truths, which I know he does, and others do in their blogs or their radio programs like Doug Wilson and some others, and people don't do anything with it, then you're complacent and you are guilty, no different than the evil people that you throw your shoes at on TV. If you don't participate in civil society, then guess what? You're a part of the problem. And again, you're probably listening to this. You know that, so tell others that they're the problem, even if they are your pastor, your elders, your deacons, or whomever. So anyway, the writer goes on to say that, and the design of revelation is the same as that of reason and conscience, though more plain and clear on many points, which is to make men devout, virtuous, and holy, and thus to exalt and bless them in a moral and spiritual view. That's what Christianity really is able to do. And that's where the sovereignty of God comes in. And that's what is happening or should happen at the pulpit, so that when you are devout, virtuous, holy, you're set apart, and then exalted and blessed in a moral and spiritual view, you don't go out and shoot people. You don't go out and murder babies in the womb and the mother of the baby in the womb. You don't go out and become totalitarian and beat up people, whether you're Antifa in mass or you're the Chinese government in the Confucius centers. You don't do that. because when you're devout, virtuous, holy, and therefore exalt and bless them in a moral and spiritual view, guess what? Your first place is in your sovereignty to God. You know what? We got 5 minutes left. So, here it is. Here's what Mayhew was writing and what he hammered home on. And this part is very, I don't have enough time to get through it all. It is also evident beyond all dispute that the apostle, and get this right, pastors, deacons, and elders, church leaders, listen. It is also evident beyond all dispute that the apostle, in requiring obedience to the civil magistrate, had no thought of enjoining obedience to him in religious concerns. For all the supreme magistrates then in the world were pagans, and idolatry was the religion and worship by law established. And certainly we cannot suppose that the apostle would enjoin it as a Christian duty to embrace and conform to the established religion when that was directly opposite to Christianity. To have threatened damnation to those who disobeyed in this case would have been to threaten damnation to themselves and to denounce the antithetical against all the Christians in the world and even against Christ himself. For these are dissenters from the established religion, and thousands suffered martyrdom for refusing to comply with the religion of the state, for asserting that right of private judgment, which I am endeavoring to defend. And the point of that is that, all of the modern pastors out there for the last 40 or 50 years have taken and been wanting this damnation put on their head because they wanted to see, the end times be what they are. Guess what? In a constitutional republic, which I've talked about in other programs, ain't supposed to happen if you got a moral, virtuous people that are doing all those other things, if you're devout and doing everything that I already mentioned. All right, I got to keep moving because Kathy gave me the 2-minute warning here. According to the apostle, the magistrate is ordained of God for a terror to evildoers, and his office is to preserve the liberties and natural rights of the people, one of the most important of which is that of private judgment and the full enjoyment of a man's own religion, provided he is a peaceable subject and a good member of societies. These and such as these are the ends for which, according to Scripture, the magistrate is ordained of God, and not to make a religion for his subjects. As the Jews said to Pilate, we have no king but Caesar. So Christians, as such, may say, we have no king but Christ. And they are traitors to him, their lawful sovereign, if they swear allegiance to any other, as Lord of their faith and the director of their religious conduct. And indeed, the very mention of the articles of faith established by law is a socialism as mathematics established by law, and deserve a worse name than I choose here to give it. Briefly, in the last minute and a half, what it comes down to is what I've talked about on the lesser magistrates. First off, God is sovereign. Magistrates are supposed to be looking to him. But if you don't raise up out of your churches, from your pulpits, within your Christian schools, within your Christian colleges, if you are not raising up moral, virtuous men and women that are devout, are virtuous, are holy, and that they are blessed, and that they're establishing a moral gifting, then you know what? You're not doing your job. Because then in society, the idea of the leaders that we elect are to ensure that evil is punished, not evil gets legislated into being, that the courts allow the evil to exist and persist, and that you allow your kids to be taught by perverts, and you allow everything to happen within our society by the ungodly and perverts. If you're allowing that to happen, you know what? You're in total violation of the truths of the Scripture. And if you're not taking and raising up moral people and understanding the extensibility of the gospel, and meaning every aspect of life, including your jobs, politics, society, social, cultural, and everything else, then you're traitors. You're a traitor, and if you're allowing it to happen, you're part of that treason. So Sam Adams stood up against it. He understood it. So did the Anti-Federalists. Come on back next